The Bucks make their second round pick and add a very interesting two-way player. Frank and I get into the details coming up next on Locked On Bucks.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Bucks. I'm Justin Garcia, joined once again by Frank Madden. We thank you for making this your first listen of the day, each and every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. The second round, the NBA draft as a whole, just wrapped up shortly before we started recording this, Frank, and the Bucks stayed at number 47 and made a pick, I suppose, for the future. Still, some conflicting reports. You were saying that Eric had a little more concrete information before, but I think the general assumption at the time of the drafting of Markovich was, this guy's probably going to be stashed and playing overseas. And it sounds like that may not be the case, but nonetheless, you draft a teenager and certainly not anyone you would assume is going to really help you immediately, but an interesting lottery ticket of sorts.
I mean, this is the best part about getting old and not investing time in pre-draft stuff, Justin.
Oh yeah,
I was tonight. Like midway through the second round, I started finally doing some reading. I saw Sam Vecini, who has nailed Bucks picks in the past, including last year. Sam's based in Australia. He was saying he was projecting the Bucks would take Rocco Zikarsky. He was right about AJ Johnson a year ago. So I was like, all right, I gotta work the YouTube to get some knowledge on Rocco Zikarsky, who I knew. I had actually talked to our friend Kane Pittman about Rocco because he's Australian, and obviously Kane is my man on all things NBL. So I'm cranking tape on Rocco Zikarsky for like 5 minutes, and then the Bulls take him, and I'm like, all right, the Rocco Zikarsky dream is dead. When Bogoljub Markovich's name was announced, I had no opinion whatsoever, but not because I know anything, mainly because I don't really know that much. And I think the collective, even from people that do follow, I think the collective response was, huh? Because, he's a European guy who plays in the Adriatic League and, was like, that's not what, let's be honest, like us Americans, like we're not typically like lusting over guys who played in the Adriatic League. We all want somebody that we watched in college who's like athletic and, kind of has like a draft sex appeal or whatever. He is not that. But, I think watching some scouting reports of him, and also like so Jesse Fisher on Twitter, he publishes an aggregation of all the draft models, the statistical draft models. And, if you look at the top 20 that he has, it's pretty much all first round picks and a couple guys that I think, were like surprised to have gone in the second round. And Bogoljub Markovich, who was 18th in his aggregate model of all the draft models, which, tells you something about his productivity because he has been playing for Mega, which has been a kind of a factory for young prospects. It's basically a team in Europe that basically I think is like essentially run by an agency, and it's a lot of like top young, mostly like Serbians, but like Timothy Luau Cabarro played there as well, in addition to Nikola Jokic, Nikola Topic, and Nikola Jovic. So if you name Nikola and you're Serbian and you end in an IC, you're going to play for Mega. They usually wear like garish, like pinkish purple jerseys. It's like they have a whole brand. Like if you're a draft nerd, like they're a pretty well-known quantity. And this is where he played. He averaged almost 14 points, 6 rebounds, shot, I think 53% from the field, 37% from three, I think, on pretty good volume. I mean, he played 29 minutes per game. So he was a very productive, professional player last year at the age of 19. He's, I think, close to 20. And, has kind of obviously good size, 6'11", I think 7-foot wingspan. So probably more of like a kind of stretch 4 type type guy. But I mean, he's not. I know there's kind of a tendency of like you see European guys, like you just assume they're like projects. I mean, he's a second round pick, so you can argue any second round pick is a project to an extent, but he's not like AJ Johnson, where he was just this like complete unknown who had never, like, he didn't play at all in the NBL last year. Or honestly, Rocco Zakarski, who I just mentioned, who basically like is 18 and like essentially didn't play in Australia last year. He actually played and was productive, was efficient, playing for, a real team. And so definitely, yeah, I mean, I think the big question now is what do we see from him in Summer League, which Milton Newton confirmed he would be with the Bucks in Summer League, and they weren't sure if he was going to, they're, as of now, at least they're not sure if he's going to come over. We'll see how much Summer League plays into that. But I think the Bucks MO has really not been to stash guys. Hugo Basson was stashed as basically the last pick in the draft. But for the most part, the Bucks have a history of drafting like very raw guys and then bringing them over right away. Of course, Giannis being the most obvious example, but they've done that, repeatedly with other guys as well, including Europeans. So I don't know. I mean, I'm guessing here at this point what the odds are of him coming over versus staying stashed, but I would not be surprised at all, given that, he has already played, and we know, I think the Bucks generally like to bring guys over, and they generally like to have guys, with the team. They don't like to just sort of maroon them in the G League either. So we'll see, but he's a second round pick, so modulate your expectations appropriately.
And that you could potentially have 3 front court players that you'll need to replace. So there's that factors in there as well. To be clear, too, when you talk about the Bucks bringing over raw players and just allowing them to develop here, do you mean like Don Maker, DJ Wilson, Sean Vaughn, basically every single player that's been drafted, save for Giannis and Malcolm Brogdon and Dante DiVincenzo for the last 10 years?
Damian Inglis, like the list goes on, right?
It's funny too, because when I heard the name, I thought, man, why is that familiar? And you and I are in the same boat. Like, I'm not going to pretend I grinded tape and did all the analysis on these picks. Maybe 10 years ago, sure. If they played for the Arizona Wildcats, I can give you a high level scouting report on that. Otherwise, didn't watch them. But when I heard the name, I thought that sounds familiar. And then when he smiled and you could see the braces, I remembered, and I don't remember who it was, if it was Kevin O'Connor or somebody else, but they were talking about him and the hype that he got. And like, yeah, he does a lot of good things. I think he's going to go higher than he should. And it basically came down on like, I don't like him as a prospect, but it wasn't until I saw the smile of, that's where I remember the guy from. I've seen a decent amount too of, yeah, he kind of comps to Lauri Markkanen with a little more feel for the game, which, like, if that's what you get for the 47th pick in the draft, if you can get Lauri Markkanen, great.
Former Arizona Wildcat, Lauri Markkanen.
Yeah.
All right, so much for moderating expectations, Justin. You just compared him to NBA All-Star.
Although, if you watch last year of Lauri Markkanen, hopefully it's 2 years ago, Lauri Markkanen that they got, not last year.
I'll take last year's Lauri Markkanen too.
I'll take it at 47.
That's fine. Yeah, I mean, I think if people watch like video of him, I think the part that stands out, I mean, you can tell he's a good shooter, has a nice stroke, shoots it confidently. He puts it like with Mega, he put it on the ball, like he handled it a lot in transition. I don't think you'd look at him and be like, this is a guy who's going to be, bringing the ball up the court a lot in the NBA. Like there's sort of a little bit of a, he looks like a 6'11" guy trying to bring the ball up, in terms of there's like a little bit of stiffness to the way that he does it. He's not, I mean, granted, I've been watching Giannis for the last 12 years, so my sort of level of expectation for 6'11", 7-foot guys dribbling is like the highest it could possibly be. But yeah, he's not going to be that type of like dynamic creator or something like that. I don't think he's going to, I doubt he's going to play like the 3 or something like that. I think he's a 4, and maybe if he could ever put on a bunch of weight, like maybe he could play some 5, who knows? But but yeah, I mean, he's got some feel, average about 3 assists a game as well. You can see some of the passing on the highlight reels of him, that he does have some, I think some hoops IQ, some playmaking feel, which is of course really important. I think that's one of those things that's, kind of underrated in terms of like when you kind of look at these like bigger guys, because if they can't like run a dribble handoff or, hit a wide open cutter, it's just, that is becoming more and more a thing that you need your big guys to be able to do. So again, but I think a guy like him, he's going to profile more as, a guy who's going to pick and pop, be parked in the corner. And obviously you're not going to like run post ups through him in any sort of near term timeline or whatever it is, if he ever does come over and play. So yeah, I mean, it's a dice roll. I know people had various other, guys that they liked, although it seemed like I don't know. I mean, there were like a few guys that I kind of looked at and, kind of did a little bit of YouTube scouting plus looking at just like analytics and stuff. And it seemed like a lot of the guys that you would have hoped might have slipped were gone by the early 40s or so.
Yeah.
So again, like, is there some great player that the Bucks missed? Who knows? Like, there's usually somebody in the like late 40s to 50s who pans out into something, but again, like every year people get super mad about like their favorite second round prospects not being picked, and 90% of those guys like don't do anything. So, and then we kind of memory hole all the guys that we liked but didn't turn into anything, and then we do it again next year. So yeah, it's the second round, so it is what it is. But definitely glad he's coming over for summer league, at least. Maybe that's the only look we get at him in the next year, but potentially an important one. And again, just the Bucks roster could fill up pretty quickly if they end up bringing a lot of guys back. So we'll see how much opportunity there is to kind of bring in. But as you said, if you're going to play any position, that's a pretty good position to play, just because there's a chance, obviously, the Bucks get thinned out in the front court.
That or point guard, if you're going to play either of those, which they also addressed, which we'll get to coming up after the break. This next segment is brought to you by Skims. And when I found out Skims was making underwear for men, I was intrigued. I've heard so much about their quality from friends and family, so I had to give it a try, and I can tell you it lives up to the hype. You may always have had issues finding the perfect fit pair, whether it be fit, comfort, or just finding the right style for you. Skims is here to change all that. Their men's line offers something for everyone, from boxer briefs to classic briefs, all designed with the perfect balance of comfort and style. I've tried them all and I'm hooked. They're perfect for an active lifestyle. They move with you. They never lose their shape, and they stay in place all day. Whether you're working out or just running errands, they're the most comfortable and reliable pair of underwear you'll ever wear. Plus, the lightweight material feels amazing, almost like you're wearing nothing at all. So shop Skims Men's at skims.com. Let them know we sent you. After you place your order, select podcast in the survey and select our show from the drop-down menu that follows. Again, head to skims.com to get your pair of Skims Men's. And the last point on Markovich too. I mean, I think obviously everybody. I mean, it's anytime a younger guy gets drafted, he's got to get stronger. He's got to bulk up, which is, I think, one of the things that's out there. And then the other one is just, you and I were talking about it before we started recording too. He's 6'10", 6'11", and has a 6'11" or 7 foot wingspan, which is the same as Ryan Rollins, essentially. But I mean, he does have that size. So he's not going to be a great rim protector per se, and doesn't have great length, but he's at least pushing 7 feet. We mentioned the two positional needs where, hey, if things really go south, this is what you need to fill. One of them is in the front court. The other is point guard. And as the draft wraps up, we see the news from Shams Charania that the Bucks have signed Mark Sears to a 2-way contract. He came in earlier in the offseason. It was one of the players that the Bucks worked out, an All-American at Alabama, had some standout moments this past season and in the tournaments. I think obviously a great shooter, very good shooter, I should say. The big knock is the size for Mark Sears, but you address one of those other needs with him as well.
Yeah, and we'll see. I mean, Sears had an interesting, you look at his college career, I think he played 5 years, and going in the 23-24 season, put up monster numbers, shot the lights out. I think that was when he had that like 10 3-pointer. I think it was in 23, right? They had that, or 24, that he had the game in the Sweet 16 where he had 10 threes. Lefty. So, you know, I love watching lefties shoot. I don't know why, Justin. There's something about watching a lefty shoot. And so was kind of, you know,
it's those flashbacks to Greg Anthony in the late 90s with the Bucks.
I gotta say, Greg Anthony was one of the lefties who did not have he actually really did not have a pretty shot. But yeah, so Sears was, you know, super accomplished, All-American type guy, opts to go back for a fifth year. And you know, expectations were obviously super high, and his shooting really tailed off last year. His efficiency really tailed off last year after, you know, the monster year he had before. Still put up really big numbers. He bumped his assists up. He was over 6 assists per game. I think he was still a first team All-American. For, you know, obviously Alabama became you know, like a powerhouse the last few years, and obviously he was a big part of that. So I mean, yeah, I mean, talented guy. The guy I immediately thought of, not a lefty, but the guy I immediately thought of was Frank Mason, another undersized, like college player of the year type guy from college. Frank Mason was at Kansas.
Another Bucks legend.
Another Bucks legend, was a two-way for the Bucks. I don't know how many years ago it was. I believe, was Frank Mason also the G League player of the year? I think he might have been.
So. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, a guy obviously that never caught on at the NBA level, was probably just, you know, didn't have the size, athleticism to kind of figure it out and crack through at the highest level. But collegiately, G League was a guy that, you know, always was very productive. So we'll see. I mean, that would be my default assumption with a guy like Sears, is that, you know, given some of the similar concerns, it's obviously an uphill battle to get to the point where, you know, he can even have a chance at the NBA level. But, you know, certainly if you're a two-way guy, like, the Bucks are an interesting place to sign, given obviously the questions about their point guard depth. You know, we know the Bucks want to bring back Ryan Rollins. We think they want to bring back Kevin Porter. But both those guys, you know, could theoretically end up elsewhere. Rollins restricted, of course. Porter unrestricted. Technically has not made a decision on his option, although I think our assumption is he would opt out, at least to get a little more money from the Bucks, even if he didn't really explore the market too much. But yeah, I mean, with Dame out for most of the year, if not the full year, certainly a place that, you know, if any of the guys that you know do end up getting hurt, yeah, you don't have like that superstar guy eating up 35 minutes per game at the point guard spot. So you never know. So yeah, I mean, we'll see. Sears, certainly. Vegas, obviously, always a good place for guards, ball handlers to, you know, get a chance to show what they can do, just given, you know, the ball is going to kind of presumably, I haven't given that much thought to who the Bucks will have in Vegas, but I don't think Ryan Rollins is going to be there. Obviously, Kevin Porter's not going to be there. So no AJ Johnson. He's not on the team anymore. So yeah, presumably Mark Sears will be the guy that will have the ball a lot. I believe, I was just looking at it, I was trying to figure out like who actually from last year's two-ways are technically still under contract. Spot Track has Jamar Bouye, who came in obviously very late in the season, and I would assume if he's under contract as two-way that he'll be part of the Vegas Bucks. He's obviously another ball handler. And then Pete Nance, who came in obviously very late in the season and had a very nice little cup of coffee there in the last game of the season, in that historic win, the Pat Connaughton game. So he's still on Spot Track. So I assume those guys are Stanley Amude is not showing as still under contract. He's showing as a free agent. So my understanding as of now is that basically Sears is taking the Amude spot. Although, let's be honest, these things can turn over very quickly. So if the Bucks found some guy they like loved as a potential two-way, like that's not to say that like, oh boy, we're stuck with, Pete Nance and Jamar Bouye for the next, year or whatever. So these things always are fluid, as we saw with Bronson Koenig.
Yeah.
The very first, I believe he
two-way legend.
He was their
Bucks
first,
wasn't he? Yeah.
Exactly. And he lasted like a month. I don't know how long he technically lasted, but Summer League was not kind to him, and became apparent pretty quickly that the NBA was not going to be the place for Bronson.
Yeah, and they also quickly learned we should try to utilize these spots on players that we can actually develop and not just local names that'll help us move some tickets for the Wisconsin Herd is probably the route to go with those two-way spots. They've also apparently Louisville's Terrence Edwards Jr., not a two-way, but he's going to be on a summer league deal with the Bucks, so we can add one more name to the list. And I mean, for old time's sake too, who knows what the future holds for Marjan? Maybe he can come back and play in the summer league for the Bucks one more time here, which would be unprecedented. I would.
Larry Sanders is available. This is 2 straight podcasts where I mentioned Larry Sanders, but maybe Larry wants to come back. I remember Larry, he came back for his 3rd year summer league, and it was like, oh, Larry coming back for his 3rd year summer league, and like was terrible, and then ended up having his incredible breakthrough season.
Yeah.
So it's just a bizarre set of circumstances, but yes. So we will. July will be the month of Bogoljub, as we eagerly await his debut in Vegas.
Some final thoughts on night 2 of the draft, and now we're headed into the weekend where we're going to start to hear a ton this weekend because free agency is 4:00 Central Time on Monday. So it is going to start to pick up in earnest here in the next couple of days. We'll start to set the table for that coming up after this. Well, if you've ever decided at the last minute to head to a ball game with your friends or family, you know the challenges that you can be facing. Maybe it's game day and you suddenly realize you want to be in the stands. Maybe it was earlier this week and you want to see Paul Skeens versus Jacob Mizorowski to just feel that excitement. Well, that's where Game Time comes in. It's the easiest way to grab last-minute tickets without the stress. With the money you save on tickets, you can splurge on food, drinks, merchandise, and even invite a bigger group to come with you. Game Time makes it possible. Game Time makes buying tickets fast and simple. Prices on the app actually drop the closer you get to first pitch, and they've got incredible last-minute deals, clear seat views, and a lowest price guarantee that takes the worry out of buying. Game Time's the official ticketing partner of Locked On MLB, making it easy to browse the app for an upcoming game for the Brewers. And as we said, Jacob Mizorowski, start scouring for those tickets right now. Their last-minute tickets and zone deals for big savings give you upwards of 10% off exclusive zone deals for FIFA World Cup matchups. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app. Create an account and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem that code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last-minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. So we get set to move into the weekend now with free agency starting. And before we touch on that briefly, Frank, I just got to say, I'm usually all right, we can just not pay attention to it with all the commotion over Giannis, but it's getting extremely tiring with the presentation tonight too of Giannis has said he's been on record to say he wants to win another championship, that we're going to conveniently leave the second half of the quote off and what is Giannis thinking when he sees this pick? Like, are we going to pivot to what Josh Kroenke had to say and bring up the same things for Nikola Jokic? Like, I'm usually not the conspiracy theorist. They just want Giannis out of Milwaukee, but the evidence is starting to pile up.
I mean, Shams even like it's like he's got like cue cards about like the words he wants to use about the Bucks. Like he keeps referencing the level of equity that Giannis has with the team, like because he doesn't need to like make a trade demand now. Like he can wait things out and all this. And
Well, and like the way he started tonight too, with like I'm told Giannis is keeping a keen eye on what happens tonight. Like, oh, so he's heavily invested in the 47th pick. That's going to swing whether or not he wants to stay here.
Well, I joked people were like, oh, like Giannis, like if Giannis cares about the draft, like this is the last thing he would have wanted. And my point was like, if this dude is stashing, this is perfect for Giannis because it makes it that much easier to bring back Thanasis. You're keeping a roster spot open for Thanasis, which I'll still go on record and say I fully expect Thanasis to get his roster spot. Don't shoot me, don't shoot the messenger. Like I'm just saying, like what would make us think that wouldn't happen at this point? Sorry, Chris Livingston, and potentially sorry, Bogoljub Markovich, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, like I said, I am not, and I feel I think if you talk to people who know things, they'll tell you like Giannis has. There have been times where Giannis has seriously given this thought.
Yeah, and
obviously it's never gotten to the point where he's asked for a trade or anything like that. I fully believe his preference is always to continue winning in Milwaukee. I think there are a set of circumstances that could bring about him wanting to go to a different team. And the reason why, and a part of the reason why this always comes up with the media is because he has said some of these things publicly and he alludes to them publicly. And Jokic never does that. Like Jokic has never entertained the idea that, well, I just want to win championships. So ... So that which made the Crunky thing like all the more hilarious because it's like Jokic has never done anything to even suggest that he would want to play somewhere else, and your freaking idiot like
and just the way
owner,
that he got to that too of like, well, we hope we don't have an injury because then we'd have to think about trading him. Like what?
What? It was so weird. like how did you like find? It's like you stepped on a rake that nobody else even like saw was there, like nobody could even have found that one. So yeah, I don't take anything with Giannis for granted. I obviously expect him to be in Milwaukee at the start of this season. I think the national media will always, I think, overstate the likelihood of him leaving. But I don't think we can act like Giannis has signed some blood oath that he'll never leave, whatever.
Yeah, I think the national media will overstate it, and I think a lot of Bucks fans will understate it and underestimate that there is at least a possibility that it could happen. Like we're pretty much aligned that if I'm going to lean more towards, and I forget what percentages that we gave at the start of the
60-40.
60-40, yeah, something like that. That's where I basically have been all off season of, I think he's going to be here, but I think to approach it with 0% chance, I think you're just being naive that it's always somewhere in the middle there. So knowing that he's keeping a keen eye on the 47th pick in night 2 of the NBA draft and what that means for the Bucks' future, the other part of it is free agency, which we said starts basically this weekend, but officially on Monday. Who's the first domino to fall, you think, for the internal free agents the Bucks have?
Well, I think the most interesting, let me see here. I think Bobby's option date is, I think, June 29th, I want to say. Which is what?
Sunday.
So I think that's probably the single thing I think kind of is like the first domino in some ways, because again, like, a day later, Brook may sign right at the start of free agency or something like that, right? We don't know what may happen with Brook. But with Bobby, he has to make another decision to see if he even goes to free agency. So I think that's probably the most interesting piece to me. I think that and I would be surprised if KPJ didn't opt out. Yeah, exactly. I would be surprised if he opted in. Would expect him to opt out. And I don't think that would speak to like him desperately wanting to leave Milwaukee. I think it just means he, thinks he has the leverage to get some more money. And I'm guessing he would probably rather stay with the Bucks, given, he found us, kind of resuscitated his career here and seemed to really enjoy it. And
he's got a great opportunity to start and put up big
Yeah,
numbers too until
exactly.
Damian Lillard theoretically comes back.
Yeah, I mean, whether he starts or if Rollins comes back or Rollins starts, whatever, like KPJ is he's gonna play, right? Like I'd be shocked if he doesn't play 25 minutes per game if he comes back, potentially more. So, yeah, I think those two guys are probably the ones that I'm kind of paying attention to the most. Since we already heard Pat's kind of obvious decision to opt in, no surprise there. So yeah, I think we'll see what happens with Bobby. I mean, again, he can opt in and he could sign an extension even, which I'd be surprised if he opted in and signed an extension.
Yeah.
I think if he re-signs with the Bucks, I don't think he's signing for. I don't think it's going to be I think his starting salary is going to be very close to what it would have been with his player option. Like is there some scenario where he gets a pay increase? Like I suppose it's possible, but I don't think that's too likely. But I also don't think he's going to take, like any sort of major haircut, since obviously he can just opt in. So yeah, so I think Bobby, that's the one I'm kind of most curious about. But I think with guys like, Gary Trent or KPJ, Ryan Rollins for sure as a restricted free agent. I think those three guys, I mean, I don't think those guys are immediate signings, honestly, unless they're coming back to Milwaukee. Like I think if those guys are day one signings, it's because they're just they have already worked out a plan with the Bucks, and maybe they've canvassed the market to know they're not a priority with other teams, so they just want to lock something in. And I think otherwise it could drag out, right? Especially with a restricted free agent like Rollins. Those are usually the guys that take the longest to find a market. They're kind of looking for scraps, once the kind of higher priority guys are gone after a few days or a week or whatever. So I would say Bobby first, KPJ decision, then we'll see what happens with Brook in particular. And then I think the guards, I think, are the guys that will probably take the longest to maybe figure out where they land, unless they just come back, which I would be happy with all those guys coming back. But I'm very curious what sort of, I would love to know what offers the Bucks have made to those guys, because I'm sure they've offered them something. And maybe with the KPJ, maybe it was like, hey, why don't you opt in for your 2.6 million,
do this,
and then we'll revisit it next summer, and we'll have early bird rights on you, and we can give you more money. But I feel like if I'm KPJ, I would say like, yeah, you know what, like, how about you give me a 1+1 for $4 million or something like that, instead of making me wait for less. So these are the dances that teams and agents have to do.
Yeah, that's been my long assumption with KPJ, that he'll opt out and it'll be a 1+1, because you and I talked about it during the season too. I just don't think it's a robust market for KPJ, even as good as he looked down the stretch for the Bucks. Let's not forget it was a pretty slow start to the playoffs. It wasn't until the final 2.5 games there. But there is going to be uneasiness and questions about off the court. So a 1+1 is another way for teams to say, all right, now we trust it, that it's been not just, hey, he had a good couple of months with the Bucks and kept his nose clean, that it's another season now that, okay, now we're invested and we'll chase after that. So I've always kind of felt that's the thing. The Bobby one is interesting because next summer is a better class of free agents, but depending on where you want to classify them, the power forward center spot is interesting. Let's see what happens with Julius Randle here in free agency. Jaren Jackson Jr. is on that list. I would assume Memphis is going to lock him up relatively soon here. Same with Paolo Banchero. Same with Chet Holmgren. So that leaves a class with guys like Kristaps Porzingis, if this is a rehabilitation season in Atlanta. Robert Williams. Like those are the group of guys that you're starting to look at there, where Bobby Portis can probably position himself better next offseason at that position. So I do wonder if it's, we talked about the teams that are showing interest in him. I don't think he's getting the non-tax mid-level from the teams that you've heard linked to him. So if that's the case and it's less or right around what you're making with the Bucks, do you just opt in and say, I'm going to test the market next summer?
Yeah. And like, if it's a sign and trade, then, again, the value teams are willing to give up for a sign and trade, unless it's, if it's like a great deal, they're obviously probably willing to give up a little bit more in terms of if it's, we're signing you to 2 years, 20 million, then the Golden State Warriors are probably willing to give up more than if they're having to pay him 3 years, 45 or something like that. Yeah. Right. Just because the contract has less value. So we'll see. Yeah. A sign and trade wouldn't shock me for Brook or Bobby. But I think, and I'm just generally very curious. Like, I think with Brook, I think there's sort of a more existential question that comes into play with him, which is like, do we have to turn the page on sort of the style that we've played defensively with Brook at the middle of it, right? Like, has the experience with him against the Pacers in these last two first rounds, has that been, a funhouse mirror thing where, that was a bad matchup and, okay, like that's a problem, but he still plays like 80 games per regular season, is still really productive. There's other matchups where he could work way better and blah, blah, blah. You could kind of, and he fits great with Giannis. Giannis loves him. We're trying to keep the good vibes. Everybody loves Brook, right? It's not like that's just a Giannis thing.
I don't know if you've seen the comments. Not everybody loves him.
In the locker room, everybody in the organization loves him.
At the risk of, again, being you just defend Brook Lopez, but to your point, what if you don't play the Pacers in the first round? What if you're playing the Pistons? What if you're playing the Knicks? And it's not quite as extreme, where it's not like, you can't play Brook Lopez in this series. Like, we're not having the conversation to the level that it's being brought up. Like, it's still going to be there because he's 37 years old, but it's not quite as extreme if you're not going up against the worst possible matchup 2 postseasons in a row.
Yeah. And obviously, like, I think they're going to replace him with a worse player if he leaves, right? Like, I think you're not getting a more productive sort of just objectively, like in a vacuum sort of player. You can't use his salary slot. You have bird rights on him. You could pay him $15 million a year. I don't know that that's a great idea given your cap situation, but you could. You can't use that money on another player in the same way. It does maybe allow you to more easily use like the biannual and the full tax, non-tax mid-level, things like that. So there's a little bit of fungibility, but not, in a strict sense. But you're probably having to kind of really scrape to, bring somebody in who's, probably it has to be like you're banking on a stylistic change, which to me would be the real upside of if they did decide to move on from Brook, who, again, I love Brook, champion forever. But I don't know, be an interesting question whether he's like, I think an interesting jersey retirement question, because he's been here a sneaky long time, won a championship. But he's obviously not like an all-star. He's not like the level of like Drew was in terms of just like individual brilliance per se. But yeah, we can save that for, an August discussion if and when he leaves. But I think if he left, to me, if he left and the Bucks like didn't try to bring him back, I think to me that would probably tell you something about like, we think we need to change the way we play defense, take a different approach. Of course, if they went out and like got like Jonas Valanciunas, then that would, maybe go against that a little bit. But I think that's the question. Like, okay, so if you do that,
we want to stay the same but worse.
Yeah, the same but worse and less likable. Yeah, we're just gonna get a guy that like, people haven't built up years of irrational hatred for. So we'll see. But yeah, like if you don't bring back Brook, then I think you start to it raises a lot of questions, right? Do you try to suddenly use like a bunch of your mid-level on like a Gershon Yabusele and become like a, small ball team? Do you, Nick Richards saw his claim on the Suns starting center position kind of go up in smoke the last couple days.
Starting and reserve.
Yeah, I mean, you could take him using your trade exception because he makes, I think, $5 million. Nick Richards is great, but he's, a solid playable.
If you can get him for nothing,
yeah, and you can get him for nothing. He's basically he's cheap, and Phoenix may look at it and say like, boy, we could save a ton of money just by giving this guy away, and we have our 2 draft picks one draft pick and Mark Williams that we've just added. So yeah, I think that's to me like the decision around Brook probably will tell me the most about the philosophy of like the way they want to play, just because Brook's limitations and / strengths also dictate so much about how you have to play from a defensive standpoint and to an extent from the offensive side as well, right? I mean, I think Brook, especially like late in the season, like with Giannis running point, like they had awesome high-low chemistry really the last few years, but Brook being able to stretch the floor and run to the dunker spot, flash to the rim, Giannis throw him lobs, things like that obviously is something that I don't know how easily you replace that, but anyway, we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, the real shame of it is that New Orleans doesn't have any bigs. Like, it's just Yves Messi, because otherwise, looking at the last couple of days, let's get Joe Dumars on the horn and let's see. You interested in this? We're willing to work out a deal for that. But that's not an option there. So yeah, it is. It's going to be interesting twofold to see what happens with Brook, and to your point too, if it's a pretty quick, the Bucks have retained Brook and it's for a decent haircut on the deal that you're signing him to, that's kind of best you can threading the needle of saying we're still going to play this way at times, but we recognize we can't invest that much money and we got to start to move down the road to something new here. But yeah, I mean, as this gets released, we're going to be coming up on the weekend, and I would imagine start to hear a whole lot of stuff trickling out Friday afternoon, Saturday, all day Sunday, as we get ready for free agency beginning Monday afternoon. The next show that we have on Monday, I mean, we're going to hear what happens with Bobby Portis. We'll have that decision by then. And as we mentioned, you're going to start to hear a lot more starting to come out. Maybe we'll get a concrete answer on the two-way situation for the Bucks as well. But next week is when it really kicks into overdrive with free agency beginning. That'll do it for today's show. For Frank, I'm Justin. We'll talk with you guys once again next week on Locked On Bucks.